Good afternoon from London, everybody. We will just take a few moments to let everybody join the call before we begin. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm in London, but I know we have people joining us from lots of different countries for our conversation today. So, a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us from. And welcome to today's conversation, which is going to be all about understanding the fraud risk in the public sector and how to tackle it. I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum. They work with civil servants and public servants all around the world. And I'd also like to thank SAS, who is our knowledge partner today. We have three great speakers with us who I will introduce in a moment. But in terms of today's topic, just to say, we are definitely in this era of technological advances which are rapidly transforming everything that the government and the public sector do, including the types of kind of risks when it comes to fraud that they face, but also maybe helping them to address some of those fraud risks as well. In a moment, we're going to hear some results from a survey about the types of trends that governments around the world are seeing when it comes to those fraud risks. But fraud also has an impact on public finances. So in the UK, for example, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has set out a crackdown on fraud in the welfare system with a focus on saving, just in the UK alone, £4.3 billion by the end of the decade. So it really is significant in terms of the scale of the challenge. And the importance of doing this, as I say, will be set out in that research, which you're going to hear about in a moment. But in our conversation today, we're going to look at kind of the scale of this issue, the trends that governments are facing around the world, and some of the tools that they have at their disposal to address some of these challenges. As I say, we've got three great speakers. I'm going to introduce them now, but we want to make this very much a conversation with you, our audience. So we want to make it as interactive as possible. On whichever device you are using, you should see somewhere a Q&A button. So please use that Q&A button at any point from now on to message in any questions that you have, any comments that you have. And I won't necessarily wait until later on in the webinar. If our speaker is saying something and you want to come in, please message your comment or question in, and I'll keep an eye out for those, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can throughout our webinar today. But in terms of our three great speakers, I'm delighted that we have with us Sean Barry. Sean is the Global Director for Risk, Fraud and Compliance Division with SAS. And with a specific focus on government, Sean has worked with federal, state and local governments around the world for over 20 years to foster innovative and efficient business processes through technology. And Sean specialises in tax and revenue, healthcare, social benefits and motor vehicle functions. And as I say, Sean will also be setting out some of the findings from research that SAS has carried out in this area. Then we also have with us a senior government official. So Johnny is the Deputy Director for Government Cyber Resilience at the National Cyber Security Centre here in the UK. And Johnny works to support organisations across the public sector and the defence sector. Johnny is with us. You won't be able to see him. He's going to be keeping his camera off, but he will be with us to answer your questions as well. And then last but by no means least, we head over to Latvia, where we have Dina Buza, who is Head of Credit Institution and Payment Services Policy Division at the Ministry of Finance. Dina has 15 years experience across innovation, financial engineering instruments and small and medium-sized enterprise support programs. And for the past 8 years, Dina has focused on the development of financial sector regulation, including banking sector regulation, resolution, payment services and fintech policy. So I'm sure you'll agree we have three great experts. As I say, please do take this opportunity to pick their brains, message in your questions and your comments. But to set the scene, and without further ado, I'm going to head over to Sean. And Sean, just a very general question, really. I know you've got the research findings that you're going to share with us, and will those kind of help us to see the types of trends I think that governments are facing around the world and what they might be facing in future? So I guess that's my opening question to you, Sean.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Siobhan. Great question. I certainly appreciate the many government leaders who are on this conference call today or this webinar today. Your experiences may be different, but what I'd like to do is at least start, Siobhan, to answer your question, is to giving everybody on the call a sense of some survey and actual data that we've collected very recently. The survey was held back in November, December of last year, and then into January of this year. We surveyed over 1,100 government leaders in the area of fraud, waste, and abuse detection and integrity. And that was across 6 continents. So this is certainly not focused on any particular region. This is a global view of some of the trends that we're seeing. So I have a few results that I'd like to show you based on this Coleman Parks research survey that was done as I described. Raquel, if you can go to the first question, please, or the first slide. I want to be clear on this. Tackling fraud is a very important priority with government leaders these days. So the 2 data points that I want to present to you, one is 85% of those 1,100 recipients said that tackling fraud, waste, and abuse was one of their top 5 priorities. And in fact, 35% said it is their number 1 priority in their government organization. So let's set the table here and say fraud is top of mind with government execs around the world. And sometimes it is quite literally the top item that they are dealing with. So you may say, okay, well, that's not a big surprise. Let's look at some of the other findings and see. So Raquel, if you can go to the next slide, please. I thought this was interesting. Well, why? You could ask the question, well, why is it such an important priority when if I'm a social benefits agency, I want to get social benefits out to my recipients and the people who are vulnerable in my country or society as fast as I can, or I have to process a tax return, or I have to get some type of claim out the door. Why? The motivation to me was very interesting. And that is that of those leaders, almost 60%, 59, said that maintaining public trust is one of the key reasons that they have such a top priority in fighting fraud. And given the environment in which we find ourselves in the world today, some people would say we are in a post-trust or post-truth world. Government leaders, I think, are still rightly focused on maintaining that public trust with their citizens. Very, very important reason. And then I think a very much related reason to that is almost half of the employees or the respondents to the survey said, protecting my agency's reputation is a top reason. And I see those 2 things as going hand in hand. So the why is important. What you don't see on here is to save money. Not that it's not a priority, but these other areas I think are really interesting to see that these were the top motivations for why the respondents said that fighting fraud, waste, and abuse was so important. Raquel, if you can go to the next slide, please. This to me was very, very interesting. The takeaway is expect massive innovation in the next 2 years. Survey respondents were asked, are you using AI today? And very specifically, there's a differentiation between general AI, which, that's certainly not new news for many of the government leaders around here. We've been using AI for years, if not decades. So 52%, over half said that today their agency is using artificial intelligence to address fraud, waste, and abuse. But a very specific form of artificial intelligence that everybody I'm sure on this call has heard about recently, generative AI, or things like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot. Today, I was surprised that almost a quarter of the respondents are using generative AI or Gen AI for that same purpose of addressing fraud, waste, and abuse. So that was interesting that there's that much innovation going on in governments around the world. But if you look, and then that's kind of the baseline, you look at, well, where are you going to head in the next 2 years? It's not a very long time period in government. That can go by in a flash. 98% of the respondents said we're going to be using at least one type of AI tool within the next 2 years. So only half are using it today, and almost 100% are saying in the next 2 years, we're going to be doing that. And very specifically with generative AI, government leaders are not necessarily known as being on the bleeding edge. It's much more comfortable to stand back and allow banking or other industries to innovate. But what they're saying here is in the next 2 years, I'm going to be forced to innovate using generative AI, a very specific form of AI. And again, almost 98%, 97% in this case said in 2 years, we will be using those tools. So I think, again, the takeaway here is massive innovation is going to be a trend over the next 2 years. If we can go to the next slide, please, Raquel. So what's the benefit of all that? What are people expecting? This, I think there's some counterintuitive findings in this. I would have said, hey, I want to go find more fraud. But you'll notice that having more fraud detective was only the second leading item on this list. Only about 40% of the people said that. And I think there's a really interesting insight in there, which is that the survey respondents, I believe, are telling us, I have more than enough fraud and caseload today. I'm not sitting around, or my staffs are not sitting around twiddling our thumbs doing nothing. We've got more than enough work. But what we don't have is the ability to automate how we tackle those fraud areas. And that's why I would suggest that the number one reason there, greater workforce efficiency, is a really interesting idea for the the folks on this webinar to take away, which is that we're not necessarily innovating to find more bad guys or more fraud, but is how do I handle the volume that I already have? And then if you look at the third reason, better prioritization of cases and alerts, which is, again, to me, an efficiency, increased time to detection. So how can I get things faster? It's not finding more volume. It's how do I deal with the already massive volume that I have in my workload in my organization. So I think those are a couple of the trends. And I think that's it, Raquel. Do I have maybe one more slide after this? Yes. Now, this is also a very interesting trend. People talk about these general ideas, but these survey results to me were really fascinating. So the recipients or the survey respondents were asked, have you seen fraud committed with artificial intelligence? So it's this idea of not just are the good guys using AI, but are the bad guys using it? 95% of the respondents said, yes, they have seen fraud in their agencies committed using artificial intelligence. And then in terms of a trend, that is an uptick in the fraudsters using AI in the last 5 years. There is a discernible trend that our government leaders are seeing, that the bad guys are using these exact same weapons against governments, just as government is trying to use it for good purposes. So Siobhan, that gives you a little bit of sense of some of the trends that at least we're seeing from the survey data. Thoughts, reactions, or I wonder what some of the other panelists have to say about those things and what they're—
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. I mean, really interesting what you said there in terms of how much of a priority tackling fraud is. I think some people might not have expected it to be, as you say, in a top 5 for 85%, but for 35% of people, the top priority for them in the work that they do in government. And also really interesting that the kind of motivation, the top motivation, is that trust in public services. So I think not just trust in how government deliver public services, but also trust in how the money is being spent or not wasted, not going to people that it shouldn't go to. So really interesting, that finding. And then, as you say there, the huge speed in which people are expecting to be using Gen AI going forward, really, really interesting. Your final slide there on whether people are already seeing fraud being committed with the use of AI leads very nicely to the first question that has already come in for you, Sean. So I'm going to put that to you straight away before I go to Dina and Johnny. So John MacDonald has said, so John works with government fuel tax program, which allows for exemptions for certain groups of operations. And what John has said, seen a move away from kind of people having to provide hard copies of documents to people producing scanned versions of digital documents, and now saying that they're seeing with AI how easily falsified documents can be created. And so Johnny's question is, can an internal government level AI, would that be able to detect fraudulent documents created using AI, or could you ever see a future where we go back to needing hard copies of documents?
Oh, interesting direction that you're taking there. So the first part of the question, yes, Johnny, what you're suggesting there is this idea of I'd use the analogy of a radar detector. So if you are driving on a highway in most roads around the world, police officials often use radar detectors to judge your speed. Well, what has happened is that there has become a cottage industry of people who have developed radar detectors. So you're a driver and you have something in your car that says, oh, there's now radar being used against me. I'm going to stop it. So what you're asking is that question, John, is can we have a radar detector for fake documents? And the answer is yes. That is, I believe, where we are headed, is to be able to use AI, and specifically generative AI, to look for fake documents, fake images, things that even to the naked eye look highly official. That's something that we're already seeing, not necessarily in tax and revenue, as you're suggesting, but an application in government where we're seeing that is in pharmaceuticals. So when you bring in counterfeit pharmaceuticals into a country, the packaging to the naked eye may look entirely legitimate, but you can use image detection to determine minute differences in the printing, in the font, and those types of things that can determine whether there are fake packages. And so it's the same kind of concept, I think, that could be used.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Sean. And thanks, Sean. You brilliantly set the scene there. I'm going to ask Johnny now in the UK. Johnny, you're from where you sit in the National Cybersecurity Centre. What are the types of trends that you're seeing? Does that match kind of the research that Sean set out in terms of the types of fraud that governments are experiencing, but also how they are thinking about addressing and tackling those?
Thanks, Siobhan, for inviting me along here today and putting this event forward. And Sean, thank you very much for the research that your organisation has done and presenting that to us. We definitely are seeing some of the information and some of the trends that we're seeing that Sean presented to us there. I think it's like, I think everyone can tell there is an awful lot more cyber attacks, cyber breaches happening at the minute worldwide, where an awful lot of PII data is being stolen as a result of that. And of course, that PII data is then being used to try and commit fraud. And that's either fraud against individuals, fraud against government systems, or fraud being used to elicit money from government in different ways. And so that's one of the trends we're seeing, the use of PII that's out there, that's being traded in the dark web, then can be used further on within that. Some other trends that we've seen and we know other governments are seeing as well is what fraud can be committed pretending to be a government system. So, for example, you'll get that text message, that pretends to be a government department saying, click on this link, we need you, we've got some tax rebates for you, or here's a free loan that you could get, or a free grant you can get from the government to do something, trying to get people to go to a website to enter more information that will either be used to commit further fraud and crime, or would be then used to download some malicious malware to the device and then steal other credentials and things. So we're seeing those sort of trends as well. And that tells me why it's important to have good cyber hygiene, either on government systems or good cyber hygiene on your personal devices. Monitoring, if you're aware that being used from a cyber breach or a cyber hack as a result of some PII data that's been taken, understanding what you've done to try and protect yourself from that is important as well. So trying to understand when malicious emails could come in that don't look quite right. And I think I'll also just pick up on Sean's response to John's question as well. Completely agree with what Sean said there as well. In my view, there is already technology out there that these government departments or these banks or these whatever is using to identify fake official documents. Of course, AI will make those fake documents look even more legitimate. But let's not forget, AI can be used for good as well. AI won't just be used for the bad stuff. So AI can be used to help train systems to be even better at detecting those fake documents. As they become better, the AI systems could be trained to become better at detecting that too. So I think while there's a risk, there's also an opportunity that we should be trying to grab within that. And there's lots of private companies out there that have been developing these sorts of technologies already that I'm sure many people are making use of, either in private sector or public sector as well.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Johnny. And really interesting you brought up there the issue of um, data and data, how data is being maybe stolen from one area and then used to commit kind of fraud in another area. So I think we'll definitely come back to, and people might have questions around kind of data. And I think that links back to Sean's issue of trust as well. How much can citizens trust? Governments trust organizations with their private data, a really big issue, I think. And really interesting there, you brought up as a trend that the trend of bad players pretending to be a government organization or a government website and then getting people to click on links, for example, that way. And as you say, they're echoing what Sean said, that AI can be used as a force for good, as well as be used as one of the ways that fraudsters can try and do ill. But I guess it's a bit of a ratcheting up, isn't it? Every time they create something with AI that can be used against government, government then have to do something better to detect it. So it seems to be a kind of ever evolving and very quickly evolving space. Johnny, just one question for you from me. In terms of the types of trends that you're seeing in the UK when it comes to maybe people frauding, for example, the benefit system, is that a mixture of individuals doing that, or is it more organized crime that we're seeing in that? Is it both?
So I don't have the exact information or data to give an exact answer on around that, but I'd imagine there is probably both in there. Okay, there probably is individuals doing things, and there is probably organized crime groups potentially doing things too. But I don't personally have the information to be able to speak on that one there. The other government departments would look into that too. We're more interested in how we can support, make the systems more secure, so that they can't be fraudulent, no matter who's trying to do that fraud, whether it's an organized crime group or it's individuals. And don't forget, some of these fraudulent activities are done non-cyber based as well, right? They're done through paper applications or just filling in details online, as opposed to larger cyber attacks that can be used to try things as well. So some of them is within our remit, some of it isn't.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. Dina, coming over to you in Latvia. So everything you've heard there from Sean and from Johnny, does that resonate with you from Latvia? Are you seeing similar things in terms of the types of fraud risks and also the technology that you're using maybe to address some of these?
Yes, definitely. I would say that all what has been said by the previous panelists deeply resonates also with me. Being in a position of the civil servant, so these are not, let's say, more related fraud issues regarding governmental payments, but more what we are seeing from the private sector participants, just for some elderly people being scammed by some fake banking sector employees. For example, they are saying that the bank is calling and trying to make some fraud regarding getting identification information. And of course, we see that this trend is indeed correlating with the rapid development of the digitalization and with the provision of the services not in person, when you have the face-to-face this customer relationship, but more with digitalized services, and this is definitely one trend that can be observed. But if we are speaking about the trends in fraud, it definitely had to start with a very comprehensive risk assessment, starting from the risk assessment of the country. Then you have to go all the down to the risk assessment of your institution, and you have to identify what are the most vulnerable areas, and then you have definitely try to make the comprehensive plan for mitigation of these risks and for elimination of those threats. And if we are speaking about the public institutions, then in Latvia, we have this culture of very high transparency. For example, for the beneficial ownership register, we have fully transparent and available for everyone. Then politically exposed persons register is also available for everyone. And then you have also the income statements from government employees. So you can see also the income statements on public domains, and this also is one of the ways to tackle possibility of let's say bad governance, because the more transparency you bring to the system, the more effective it at the very end becomes. And then if we are speaking about the possibility to tackle the fraud which government is facing, there is a very critical element of cooperation between state institutions. And with this regard, we have the initiative of interconnection of our different registers of state registers, just to have it in one place. And we have also the initiative of this AI center, which will be gathering all this information from different state registers, and then together with our Central Statistical Bureau, analyzing it and also using all these AI models. And the more data is integrated, the more data can be obtained by various stakeholders in governmental institutions, the less there is the possibility for having options for making the fraudulent activities for certain governmental institutions. So anyway, in this analysis of the data, you will get along that there's some kind of a scam or some elements are, let's say, popping out as red flags in this data set. So I think the more cooperation between different governmental departments will be in place in exchange of the data, the better, and the less chances for the fraudsters.
Dina, thank you. That's really interesting to get that perspective from Latvia. I like what you said there about one of the trends being as governments increasingly digitalize their own services, so you have less face-to-face interaction with the public, that allows fraudsters to come in and do those kind of online scams, as you say, pretending, going back to what Johnny was saying, pretending to be organizations, trusted institutions, or government bodies, for example. But then also bringing in, as you say, one of the ways of tackling some of this is to have a more integrated system across your organizations where you're sharing data, and then you can use new technologies then once all that data is shared to find the red flags, to see where some things aren't connecting as you would expect them to, and maybe identify possible areas where fraud is happening. And also, the more transparent you are, the harder then it is for people to play the system. So really interesting in terms of that as a kind of approach there from the Latvian perspective. Thanks so much to all of you for that opening question. We have another question coming from Jodel Wren, who said, I think government entities struggle with balancing the controls needed to mitigate fraud risk and getting the resources to the end user. In many cases, the individual needing the resources may not be as savvy to navigate the requirements and see them as barriers. I like this question. I think this question is to stop the fraudsters. Are we putting so much friction in the system that maybe the end user who really does need maybe a benefit or something is finding it harder to get the benefit that they need because we are trying to make it harder for fraudsters to, misuse that system. Johnny, I'm going to come to you first. Is there a balance to be had between making your systems, because you do the kind of cyber hygiene, as you say, between making your systems secure and minimizing fraud, but also ensuring that those systems are still user friendly and that you can get relief, for example, and benefits out to citizens that need it?
Yes, absolutely. In terms of the requirements and how who's paid out and what's paid out, that's obviously not our remit within the NCC. But absolutely, we have to be very pragmatic and practical in the advice that we give when it comes to cybersecurity hygiene in terms of the fraud risks, etc., that the UK government has to consider. So absolutely, it's a fair point. The balance has to be got right. In there, and that's definitely for another part of government to look into. But we do look at those practical implications of the usability of how you can apply, etc. What are the security factors in behind? That is very important to us as well. But overall, we would look at also the security advice for the whole system that's monitoring the data and the applications in terms of making sure that that cannot be abused with more personal information being stolen as well.
Thanks. And Sean, and then Dina, your thoughts on that question about getting this balance right between a secure system, but also one that's still usable, essentially.
So, Siobhan, I will tell you that that question comes from somebody who has a lot of experience
Right.
With this, because that whole idea of friction, I think, is a really insightful thing to think about. So what I would suggest is that friction is not always bad. You want friction with bad guys who are trying to come in and steal money from your program, but you want to have the least amount of friction with the legitimate citizens or businesses with whom you're trying to interact. And getting that balance right is extremely important, of knowing to whom should I use friction very, very as a strategy of putting up barriers when I should be, and then when I should lower barriers when there's lower risk. So there's analytical ways of doing that. There's other ways of doing that. So I think that the question is spot on in terms of how to use AI to do that.
Thanks. And Dina, I guess your expertise very much in regulation. I guess it's a similar thing when you're thinking about regulation. You don't over-regulate, but you need to make sure that you get the right kind of framework in place. Is that very similar when it comes to kind of these, making sure these systems are safe?
Yes, definitely. I think that you always have this equation with striking the right balance between the let's say innovation and over-regulation. So in this equation, you have to find always the right balance. But as a very, very least backstop, I would say that in all this equation, there is very important issue, which is strength of the judicial system. And if let's say the system as system is allowing some possibilities of these fraudulent actors, then we do have to have instruments for getting and going after these abusers within the judicial processes, so to say. And I think that this is very important, that also this element in all equation is working perfectly.
Yeah, thanks, Tina. At all levels of the system, it needs to be working well. I did say at the beginning of the webinar, we're going to make this as interactive as we can. So before I ask our three panelists the next question, I'm going to actually come to you, the audience, with a couple of questions. So we have 4 questions that we're going to put to you, polling questions. I'd be hugely grateful if you could answer these questions. They're going to come up, I think, on your screen, and you'll have it's like multiple choice. You can choose the answer that you think is most relevant for you. And then we will be able to actually see the answers immediately on our screen. So I can see there's quite a few people on this call at the moment, so it's a great time to do it now. So Raquel, let's bring up the first question, number 1 of our poll. So the question number 1, how well do you understand the fraud risk that your organization faces. So this is if I asked you this now, and you have 5 possible answers there, from you understand it very well to you think you understand it very poorly. If you could click on the answer that you think most matches where you are, that would be great. So that's question number 1. Just give you a couple of seconds to do that. There are 4 questions that we're going to do. Okay, let's move on to question number 2. Question number 2. What is the top thing that would help your agency or your organization or your department capitalize on using data and AI? We've already spoken about use of data and AI for fraud detection. And you again have, I think you've got 6 there. So would it help you? Training on AI, improved data quality, clearer AI regulations, more budget, better cross-agency partnerships, or other? And it's good because all of those issues have come up already, I think, in the conversation. So if you want to click one of those, what would help you most in the use of data and AI to help you detect fraud? Question number 3, Raquel. What is your top concern around using data and AI to detect fraud? So what's the biggest challenge for you, do you think, in using data and AI to detect fraud? Is it the cost? Is it potential bias? Is it lack of data? So not enough data available to you, skills, or anything else? So is there another thing that you would have said there? What's your top concern around using data and AI? Maybe, as Sean said, maybe you would like to use AI more, but don't feel like you have the skills to be able to do that. So that's one of the options. And then the last question, question number 4. How prepared is your agency to detect and respond to AI-powered fraud? So this is what we've been talking about. Not only can you use AI to help fraud, help detect fraud and minimize fraud, but how well prepared is your agency to detect and respond to fraud that is driven by AI? Going back to that first question we had from the audience. Do you feel you're not at all prepared in your department, somewhat prepared, very prepared, or completely prepared? So they are the 4 questions. If you could answer that, that would be great. And I can see we've got comments coming in as well, which we'll come back to, which is brilliant. Great, Raquel, thank you very much. Now, I think Raquel, who is my colleague who's working hard behind the scenes on this webinar, are you able to put the answers up almost immediately, Raquel? So do we have the answer to question 1 in terms of how people responded to that question? So question 1 was, how well do you understand the fraud risk? So we have there, let me see, we have well over half, so 53 and 19, very well or quite well. But there are over nearly 30% who neither well or poorly or quite poorly. So yeah, almost a third. Quite poorly or neither well nor poorly understanding the fraud risk. Thank you. What was for question 2? What's the top thing that would help you use data? So training. Training has come out as the top thing for AI, with then improved data quality and then going down, yeah, better cross-agency partnerships, which is what you were talking about, Dina, I think, working more across silos and across departments. Question number 3. What's your top concern around that? Lack of data availability. So skills, yeah. So that matches with training. I think skills then a big issue, and lack of data availability. So only cost quite a small one there. There is other, and I noticed Jodelle came back and said data privacy is a concern. I think that was around question 3 as well. Jodelle said data privacy. And then question 4. How prepared is your agency? So not at all is quite, so this is quite interesting. So very prepared is only 7%, and nobody completely prepared. And the vast majority somewhat, I wouldn't say that's a glowing answer there. Somewhat prepared, 63%, and not at all a third of people, really. 30% not at all prepared on question 4. Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to Sean, Dina, and Johnny. Anything there that surprised you in terms of those answers?
The question about budget, I would have, you know, every government that I've ever been in never has enough budget to do everything that it would like. So I would have put money in Las Vegas, that would have been the top answer.
Yeah.
But it was only, I think, 10% of the folks said that that was the biggest impediment. So
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting observation.
Yeah, and skills and training coming out really, really high there. Dina, Johnny, anything you want to add on the findings there?
Yes, I think that, of course, Sean was looking from the private sector perspective more. We see indeed in the governmental sector that I think the cost is not the most decisive issue. In tackling fraud, it's more about really the availability of data. This is key.
Yeah.
And the skills. I think the skills is also very, very important.
Thanks.
Yes, and of course the possibility also and preparedness of the institutions, if we are correlating it with this information which came from the SAS report, I think it will be, of course, upscaled more within these 2 years.
Yeah.
When the use of AI by the governmental departments is expected to grow exponentially. So I think it has to do also with this current level of use and therefore this unpreparedness for detection of the AI fraud.
Thanks, Dina. And Johnny, does that match? Because you work, obviously, you say you support organisations across government and across defence. That there's the concerns around kind of lack of training and skills, and then lack of data available, you know, to do what they need to do. Does that match your experience?
Yeah, it is some of the things that we see. First of all, I think looking back at those questions that were asked, you know, I thought it was very encouraging that in the first question about understanding the fraud risk in the organizations, the scores there were quite high. So that was really good and very well and quite well. But then if you compare that to the final question about how prepared are you, it wasn't a great correlation there, was it? You know, people understand the risk very highly, but, you know, so again, moving into, I guess, what Sean said, I was quite surprised cost wasn't a big thing. We're talking here about the public sector where money is tight in a lot of public sector organizations, and some of this stuff is not cheap. But then you
we've lost Johnny for a minute, I think. Hopefully he will jump back on in a moment. Sean, I want to come back to you while we're waiting for Johnny to join again. I just want to come back to you because I was really surprised by the findings of question 4, which was how prepared are you on the dealing with AI-powered fraud? And I wondered if you hadn't a specific, because you mentioned this in your opening presentation as well. Do you have a specific example you could share with us of what that type of thing might look like?
I do. And so I have one prepared, but John McDonald, by his question and then the follow-up in the Q&A, also inspired me. So I'm going to share my screen for just a moment.
Sure.
Let's see. And
John, when you're once after Sean, if you raise your hand, if you're back in, I'll bring you back in. Thanks.
And just confirming, can you see my screen?
Not yet, no.
Okay, I will.
There we go. Yep, I can see it now.
All right. So you should be able to see a window for ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So we talked about the use of how bad guys use AI and generative AI. So John, you inspired me. So on the fly, I went in and just typed in a very simple question into ChatGPT. Can you generate a fuel tax receipt? And it came back in seconds and said, of course I can, but they want additional information. So I changed my prompt. So can you generate a realistic image of one? John McDonald Industries, address in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It's dyed diesel. All the information that it had asked for. Now, it came back and then said, well, it's processing a lot of images right now, so it may take a while. So if I wasn't cheap and I actually had paid for ChatGPT and didn't have the free version, it probably would have come back. So here's one example, but I have another example that I had prepared beforehand, and that was a prompt that I had written about creating fraudulent income tax returns. So I created a prompt, and in this case, I was looking for a U.S. federal tax return for a taxpayer named, oddly enough, Siobhan Benita, lives in Los Angeles. And I put just a few details in here. And of course, the tax preparer in this case is Bernard Madoff. So those of you who know Bernie Madoff, and provided just a little bit of information. And so when I enter that prompt, let's see what happens. And this is a live demo. What it has done is, sure, I can do that. I can create essentially a fake tax return. And it provides a lot of information. If you look at all of the line item information, it gave you an address of Wilshire Boulevard. I didn't tell it to do that. It gave a postal code or a zip code. Now, it wouldn't provide a social security number, which is probably a feature of ChatGPT that protects it. But wages, income, adjustments to income, standard deductions, tax credits, just in a few seconds, I was able to prompt it to create a pretty realistic tax return. And so it's now asking me, would you like an image of that? Or I could also say, can you put that data into a CSV format? And if I'm a fraudster, I could use that to then copy and paste tax returns and submit fake tax returns. So what I would suggest, and so now I'm getting this CSV format. So what I'd like to just show is I would suggest and really highly encourage the folks on this call to go out to the free version of ChatGPT and start these prompts. Just see how easy it can be to generate this fake data as a fraudster. And then it's learning how to develop ways of detecting this type of fake content or AI-generated content to protect your programs.
Sean, thank you so much. I mean, that's quite scary, isn't it, when you see how easily that kind of thing can be done. And we've got questions coming in that I'm going to come back to. But Johnny's back on the call as well. Sorry, Johnny, you could always hear us, apparently. We just couldn't hear you for a little bit. I think you were talking about cost, and we have got questions about cost as well coming in. So back over to you, Johnny, and then I'll come back to Sean.
Yeah, so I guess what I was saying before I think the network went down a little bit was for me, it was interesting that cost wasn't as high up the barriers there, like Sean was saying as well. But then, of course, if you think about it, the money you spend on this will hopefully be less than the money you will save if you can tackle the fraud of system type benefits exactly as well. So those are things that sort of stood out to me in the polling questions.
Yeah, really interesting. We did a lot of work with a team from the White House, actually, who led CyberStart. And they said, if you want any investment in digital transformation in general, you should do it through a cyber kind of lens. So argue for cyber investment, and then you can do broader digital transformation, because kind of cyber is so important, but it's quite hard to get investment in digital. So really interesting, as you say, the business case stacks up because of what you can save for the money that you invest. I'm going to come back to the questions that we've got, because I think they link to lots of things that you have all said there. So let's see, the first one is Alfred has asked, and this comes back to kind of, I guess, cost and efficiency. What free generative AI tools could be utilized in the public sector to enhance fraud detection efforts? And I'm going to link that to Jodel, who's come back in and said, I wonder with Microsoft 365 having Copilot, whether that helps with cost concerns. However, could relying on Copilot be limiting the ability to have a robust program? So are there things available, you think, that the public sector could be using that don't cost them a lot? Dina, are there things that you in Latvia are already using like that are kind of cost effective?
Of course, yes. The same ChatGPT and of course Copilot as well. Yeah, but of course we are more looking for more specialized use as well, not only for this generalistic use.
Yeah,
And
so
this development also our specific use cases in this AI center as well.
yeah, thanks, Dina. Sean, your thoughts on kind of off-the-shelf free tools, and also I just want to bring in, I think it was John that said, was it John? And that might have gone off, that said, had you used a kind of real tax, a fuel tax receipt, then AI would have done even better because it would have kind of used that as a template for what you were showing on your live demo there.
Yeah, so the fundamental question, are there free tools? Yes. And Dina just described them. It was ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, and there are others that are out there as well. What I would suggest is you get what you pay for often. So you could use some of the free tools, but you saw the limitation that I ran into with producing the image. And I would also suggest that a lot of the large language models that are behind these generative AI solutions use data that has been uploaded or is publicly available. And guess what? Most government agencies don't want to upload their data into the web for everybody to take a look at. So what I would suggest is oftentimes having a more targeted generative AI application that is essentially in-house, where you don't have to upload your data to ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot. There can be great benefit in that, but that also costs money. So there's a trade-off there.
Yeah, thanks. Johnny, I'm going to ask you the next question, which is coming from Anna, who's in Ottawa. Hi, Anna in Ottawa. And Anna has said, I'm wondering if instead of all of us as public servants dealing with the aftermath of the things like the thing you showed, Sean, using ChatGPT, wouldn't it be better? Hold on, I just still need to get the question up. I think it's gone. Let's have a look down here. Wouldn't it be better if we united forces to correct ChatGPT's limitations? So essentially that we got together to say that ChatGPT ought to code no fraud allowed. Is that even possible, that globally the public sector could get together and say this kind of thing shouldn't be allowed to happen on ChatGPT? Johnny, is that, I don't know, I'm not technical enough to know, is that even a possibility?
Yeah, thanks. I've not looked into this specifically, but I think things like that will be quite hard because of the whole purpose of it is meant to have data in there to then be able to generate stuff. And so actually, as it starts to learn, it starts to develop, then it will start to do more things like that. So it could be quite hard to say don't do this. I guess you could potentially, I guess in the example, let's use the example Sean used there, about, tax receipt or, something like that. If you put in a certain type of question, would it say, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to do that? So you have seen some things turn around and say, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to do that. And it could be to do with images, or it could be something like that. So there may be the ability to do that. But of course, you've got to remember there's a lot of legitimate reasons to be able to do that. And so if you have a legitimate reason to create a receipt, then does that prevent the legitimate people being able to do that? So it's quite a hard balance to be had. And it's an interesting one that I'm sure that a further conversation could be had on. But I'm fairly certain some of these tools already, if you ask for certain things, it will say, no, we're not doing that. But there also has to be a limit as to what that would be.
Yeah, thanks. Dina or Sean, did you want to come in at all on that issue of, is it possible to limit what these tools could do?
Actually, yes, with the Digital Markets Act, which is enforced in the European Union, you have certain limitations what you can do and what data you can process, and of course, it all have to come hand in hand with the ethical use of data. And we see also that GDPR is also putting some limitations on possibility to use personal data. And of course, for the development, this is more an obstacle. But if you are abiding these rules, and if you are overcoming these obstacles and playing by the rules, then of course you are getting the better results. Of course, you can also take into account that all these Gen AI models include potentially as well the bias, and you have to be very careful when you are analyzing the outcomes of these Gen AI models.
Thanks, Dina. Sean, anything you wanted to add on that one?
I think Dina and Johnny have covered it well.
Brilliant, thanks. So Bunmi has just put in a question, which I want to add to a question that I had for all of you. So Bunmi has asked, how can potential fraud be spotted in high volume output environment? So how can you spot? I think this goes back, Dina, to what you were saying, that the more data you have that links across lots of departments, you can maybe start to detect inconsistencies, things that you wouldn't expect. And my question to all of you, my kind of question I was going to ask next was, how are governments using kind of analytics in the fraud challenges that they're facing? So, and how is that kind of the use of new technology when it comes to using analytics being embedded into day-to-day working practices? Dina, I'll start with you on this one because so how does that work in terms of Bunmi's question? How do you spot potential problems when you've got so much kind of volume of data to get through?
Of course, you have to analyze the data which is in the hands of the government, and as I said, this interconnection of the registers is of the utmost importance for getting the right answer on whether it's fraudulent activity or not. Yes, I think as well my answer regarding the transparency and availability of public sector data is also the part of the answer to this question. So not to create undue barriers for sharing of the data, which is purely the public sector data.
Yeah, thanks, Dina. And Johnny, similarly to you, so you obviously sit in the center in the cyber center, but how are you using kind of AI and analytics in terms of detecting fraud, but cyber more generally from where you're sitting? How are you already using some of these new technologies?
So if I sort of take a step back and try and think about what is the right way to do this. So I think, in any organization, you've got experts who understand things, okay? So you've got, in the banking sector, there's going to be a lot of experts in there, for example, who understand fraud in the banking systems. In the benefits departments in government, there's going to be experts in there who understand how fraud is happening across the benefit systems, for example, as well. And you'll have experts in cyber and other places like that there. So the first thing to sort of do is try and have, those experts try and understand what are the trends, what are the activity that's going on, what are the vulnerability and weaknesses that could be used by a fraudster, and then what differences have you seen over time as a result of technology changing or anything as a result of that. And then making use of those experts to try and come up with ways to mitigate and identify that as well. So you can't identify, mitigate without actually understanding the threats and the vulnerabilities and the trends and the activities in the first place. And then I think after that, it's about then, okay, so how can we use data science? How can we use AI itself to try and automate and make this an awful lot, get that skill that we talked about at the very beginning. And I think that Sean, you and Siobhan had mentioned at the very beginning about how do you automate that to get the skill. So those are the sort of ways you would look at doing this. And if we use an example of where are the choke points. So in fraud, what is the purpose of fraud? The purpose of fraud usually is to make money, right? So at some point, money has to move around. So one thing you can think about is in the banking sector, how can AI be used to identify more of those fraudulent transactions being moved around? So if you can't identify, at the front end, when the money's moving, and you can see this an awful lot, when you try and use your credit card, if you try and use, do some sort of banking, if you've used your credit card in a different location quite quickly from a previous location, it'll say there's something up here, there's something quite wrong that's gone on here. So how can AI be used to identify more trends and activities like that in the banking sector is a good example. And so simple things like, IP address geolocation, whenever you're doing some sort of workings on the government system, for example, if a user is logged in from this location and the IP address says they're in the UK, and then 5 minutes later, they've allegedly logged in, and the UK government system or any government systems identified they could have logged in from, I don't know, some other country that's many miles away. There might be something wrong there. Now, there might not be, of course, the way the internet works, but there might be. And so that's something that could be looked into there. So maybe sector factor authentication could be used to genuinely check that that is the right person that's coming in. So to us, it's all about how do you actually understand the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses, the trends and the activities, and then move that into the mitigation space, and then move that into the automation space after that. That's the sort of challenge I would put out to the people on this call today.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Johnny. That's really helpful. Great to have that concrete kind of example there. Sean, your thoughts on this as well. So Binmi's question, how do you use technology to spot these things? But also from your experience of working with so many organizations across the public sector, what are they already doing, or what could they be doing more of?
Of course. So what I would say is, in the past, there has been this there has been a trade-off between accuracy and speed, which is, well, I can be highly accurate in my fraud detection, but I can't do it in real time or in speed. I have to, it takes a lot of processing power to do that. Today, the world has changed, and AI and the advancement of technology have allowed it so that there is no longer a trade-off between the two. You are seeing some very innovative governments to tackle finding volumes of fraud among super large volumes of transactions. I'll give you two examples. One comes from India. So the National Health Authority there covers healthcare claims for about 600 million Indian citizens. A massive number of healthcare claims that come in each year and each day. And they're able to, in essentially real time, analyze those healthcare claims that are submitted to the government and pick out the suspicious ones before they get paid to the doctors and the hospitals. Second example is in HMRC in the United Kingdom. His Majesty's Revenue and Customs is doing a fantastic job of essentially real-time detection of tax compliance issues with the 30 million or so people in the United Kingdom who file tax returns and declarations each year. So technology allows you to find that large volume or analyze a large volume of data to find either small or large volumes of fraud.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And that links to, so there was a comment John put in. He said, just want to make a quick comment. The struggle I have for understanding this sort of fraud risk isn't so much that it exists, it's the scope of it and how elaborate it can be. So I guess the more data you have, the more you can kind of get that picture of exactly what is going on. We've got lots of questions still, and I'm conscious of the time that we've got. Richard Johnson, Dina, has a question for you. On Dina's point about data sharing, are there ways that government can incentivize data sharing to overcome barriers that government often face? Could it be that for every pound of fraud a department's data helps identify, it gets to keep 20p for its revenue? So are there creative ways that you could incentivize better data sharing, do you think?
Well, this initiative, of course, is very could be very incentivizing, but we know that with the current system of the allocation of the public budget, it is always about the prioritization and the scarcity of the resources. And yes, I guess it is very good initiative just for incentivizing the finding of the fraud. But of course, we have currently in the system also the institutions which are already dealing with these issues. State Audit Office, and they are tasked with finding inefficiencies in the systems. Then of course, if we are speaking about the private sector, the Financial Intelligence Unit is also doing a great job in finding the potential areas where the money is flowing, and with regard of the illicit financing and finding these for the possibility of the confiscation. If we are seeing about the clear example of how let's say these systems are awarded for finding illicit financing, then we have a example of the confiscation fund, where you can assign the confiscated assets which have been detected by the law enforcement authorities, exactly for strengthening their capacities of finding the fraud. So you see that some of these elements have already been embedded in the system and are already functioning.
Yeah, thanks, Dina. We had a couple of questions sent in advance. I think they're from somebody sitting in the audit profession. I'm going to ask the two of them together. If you don't want to answer one or both, that's absolutely fine. So the two questions that came in are, to what extent can acts of corruption be considered as part of the definition of fraud within the context of public sector auditing? So I think that's a terminology question. And then the second question the same person sent in is, how do fraud-related audit responsibilities and procedures differ between the public and the private sectors? And they asked some very specific things, but I think I'm going to keep that general given the time that we've got. So is it different for the public and the private sector when it comes to kind of fraud-related auditing responsibilities? Sean, you're smiling on this one, so I'm going to come to you first. Maybe that first thing is fraud and corruption, are they kind of part of the same thing?
Two sides of the same coin as far as I'm concerned. You look in places around the world where there is generally perceived to be high levels of corruption. I think Johnny mentioned it. Why do people commit fraud? It's for the money. Why are people corrupt? Generally for money and for power as well. So particularly in Latin America, you often see corruption eating at the public trust. It steals from the public purse. So it could be something as benign, if you will, as a customs agent who lets a friend bring goods and services into the country without any kind of customs duties. Sometimes it can be just rampant theft by a government and the employees. So I see them as being two sides of the same coin, and using the same technologies and the techniques that you would find for traditional fraud programs, turning them internally on internal data is perfectly fair game in my viewpoint.
Was there anything in the research in terms of corruption or kind of inside, threats from inside, that is it growing? Is it declining? Was there anything in your research?
Nothing explicit, other than there was this idea of insider threat, which is people within a government agency who are perhaps corrupt, or if they want to exfiltrate data to monetize and line their own pockets. So there wasn't anything in the research specifically, other than an acknowledgement that insider threat certainly does exist.
Okay, thanks. Dina and Johnny, similarly, the two questions to you. Anything you want to add on kind of fraud and corruption, or are there any differences between the way the public sector and the private sector have to think about fraud and auditing? Dina, come to you then, Johnny.
Well, the corruption risk have to be taken very seriously within the threat assessment of the organization as such, and it is definitely going hand in hand with the possibility of the fraud, because if there is a corruption risk present, then you also have a very high possibility of fraud. Due to the fact that there is some kind of benefits received vis-a-vis private sector, you have to make the mitigating measures regarding the corruption risk definitely, and also embedded in your governance system, risk assessment, and of course what I mentioned. As more transparent is your organization, the less there is possibility for the corruption risk. But the risk assessment as a part of the auditing, especially if you're looking at at the public institutions, this had to be definitely taken as one of the very serious serious risks, and it has to be audited as part of the compliance audit of the public institutions, and as well as part of the private institutions as well.
Thanks, Sina. Johnny, I know this is probably not so much the area of the National Cybersecurity Centre, but any thoughts you have on kind of corruption and fraud?
So nothing to add on corruption at all, but I just think looking at the audit angle, from my perspective, if we take it back to the beginning where I had said how lots of fraud happens as a result of PII being stolen, and a lot of government organizations hold a lot of PII, and actually if that gets stolen, one way to mitigate that is actually understanding what is the audit of your cyber ecosystem, what is the audit of your digital footprint as an organization, and how do you actually make sure that you've got a good cyber secure system and less legacy IT. And you need to do that by auditing your digital footprint. There's an awful lot of stuff out there where people have digital technologies on their networks that they don't know about, that sometimes is in for a cyber actor. So actually looking at how you can audit your cyber footprint, your digital footprint, to prevent that data being stolen in the first place could hopefully help prevent less PII being stolen, which then prevents further fraud happening down the chain.
Brilliant, fantastic. I'm just looking at the time, and I think that it probably was the last question. I don't know if anybody, I mean, the one question, but it would be 30 seconds each, I think, that I had left to ask is, what do you think's coming down the line? Are there particular kind of new threats that you think governments should be preparing for? But it would be 30 seconds each. Sean, anything that you've spotted from your research, anything along the horizon that you think governments should be thinking about or already are starting to think about in terms of new threats?
I think it's not a new threat, but it's just an increased volume of, because it's so easy to generate fake documents and realistic looking fake documents and transaction data. There's going to be huge volumes of data and attacks that come on government programs around the world. So it's not new frauds, it's just the volume of fraud that will be committed.
Thanks. And that comes back, I guess, to the need then for training and that skills thing that we picked up on. Dina, your thoughts, what's coming down the line? What should government be prepared for?
Government have to invest in the upskilling of the employees, and of course in more digitalization for exchanging of data between the different departments, which I was already mentioned.
Yeah. Thanks. Johnny, final thoughts to you. And I know you've talked a lot about getting the system secure, getting that audit in place. Anything you want to add in terms of what's coming, what should governments be preparing for in future?
So what Sean had said about scale and volume, I think I'll talk about speed. And so you often see that fraudsters take advantage of the news of the day. And as a result of AI and other technologies coming along, they'll be able to turn things around a lot faster and try and do fraudulent activity quicker as a result of the capabilities and technologies that are out there, including the free ones. And so as well as volume and scale, it's a speed, and people have to be prepared for that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. We are coming in just on time. I mean, there's so much that we covered there. And I mean, I think it shows the threats aren't ending, the threats, as you say, getting more in volume, getting faster, that people are able to kind of do a lot of the stuff with new technologies that's coming, but equally that technology then giving governments the tools that they need to counter some of this activity and also to get ahead of the game in terms of detecting where some of this activity might be happening or going to be happening. Lots of food for thought there. Thank you so much to the audience for all of those great questions and great engagement. Thank you so much to Dina, to Sean and to Johnny for giving us all your expertise and your time today. If we weren't able to answer the question, there are a couple there unanswered, we would make sure we try and do that behind the scenes. And just to say that this video will be sent round. The link to this video will be sent to everybody who joined today and everybody who registered. I know there are people on different time zones as well. So you will be able to watch this again on catch up and you will be able to share it with any colleagues. Alfred has said, how do we get the presentations? We will share those with you. And I think some of the stuff has already been sent out in the chat, Alfred, as well, but we'll make sure you get the full report from SAS as well. There will also be a write-up of today's webinar with the key points that were made, and that will be shared with everybody in a couple of weeks' time. I'd like to say thanks again to SAS for being our knowledge partner today. And finally, to the audience, we've probably sent you a very short questionnaire. If you don't mind taking a couple of minutes just to fill that in, it means that we keep giving you webinars on topics that you find most useful for you. So I'd be hugely grateful if you could fill that in. But thanks again to Dina, to Sean, and to Johnny. Really, really important topic. Great conversation. I really enjoyed that one. And I hope we see you all on another one of our webinars very soon. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are.
Thanks, Siobhan. Thanks all.
Thank you.